In the life that we live, we go through trauma. They might be caused by marriage dissolving. Whatever it is, there will be change in our lives. And change is the factor that we need to deal with. The trigger that we experience in our life is caused by the changes that we are going through. We see changes in the reality of what we perceive that we are. And once we define what we are, and that reality of what we think we are is disturbed or is destroyed in some cases, we go through a process which ends up perhaps in depression, and if we're not careful, some people just go another way, which is totally unfortunate in their lives. What I want to say today is that it is normal for us to experience change. If we do not have change in our lives, there is no growth. We live in a world where we have 4 seasons in a year, and every season bring about different changes, different challenges, and different victories in that. And when we experience life as a change of season, and we see the trauma that we are in, or the changes that it causes, that it will bring us into a new reality. And if we embrace that new reality, it will just bring us forward into a better life that God has planned for us. Let me use a very simple explanation. The life of Joseph. Joseph had a reality of a dream, which was totally different from the reality that God had in his life. And there was a conflict of interest between the reality of Joseph's perception of the dream and God's plan for his life. And he had to be stripped from his own reality to enter into another reality, which was caused by God for him to be successful. So what I'm trying to say here is that not all changes are bad. I would like to say that most changes that we go through in life is for the benefit of ourselves, that God brings it across our road so that we can grow, that we can rise up, and that we can overcome, because that is the calling God has laid upon Christians in this world. But we need to understand, when we go through a divorce, when we go through changes, maybe a job loss, maybe there was an hijacking, whatever the trauma is, that our reality world is being changed, our comfort zone is becoming to be challenged. And that makes us very uncomfortable, which brings us into stages. The first one is the trigger, which is the trauma, maybe the hijacking, whatever it is. The next phase that we go through is the phase of ignoring what has really happened. We say it does not happen. You say you don't acknowledge what has happened. The next one is frustration. The one after that is depression. So let's go through the process. After the trigger happens, we get into a phase and say, it is not my fault. It didn't really happen. We sometimes say that it didn't happen and I will be able to cope whatever has happened in any case. I am strong enough, I'm broad enough, I'm educated enough, and we try to rationalize, and we try in our mind to work out the process that we will overcome whatever has come our way. And we try to put a cover on that and say it didn't really happen. But if it happened, nobody else would know about that. And that is one of the most dangerous situations to get in, when you put a lid on something that has happened in your life, because you are scared that when it becomes public, when it becomes known, that you might not be able to work the consequences that comes with that. So let's look at the frustration side of it, because in the frustration side of it, it builds up because we're ignoring the signals that are coming our way, because we think that we can deal with it ourselves. And in the frustration section, the phase that we go in, we start to realize that I cannot cope with the circumstances. I want to go back to the pre-trauma experience, to the stage before everything started to change. And I'm not only talking about the lives of our people. I'm sometimes now dealing almost weekly with congregations that are going through changes in this world, where theologies have changed, the country, the demographies of towns have changed, and pastors seem to be in a process where they do not understand the changes, and they cannot feed it back to their congregation, not only to survive, but to overcome and to be relevant in their own communities. And this is where the frustration gets into it. It's the realization of the inability that we have to cope with the circumstances that we are in. And then starts the blame game. It was not my fault. It is because of other people. And we start the blame game, and then there's anger coming forward, there's fear coming forward. And eventually that will lead to fear. But when we get into that, we also start in the blame game to say that it was them, it was not me. And we start to say the circumstances led to what in the situation I am in. And eventually we also sometimes acknowledge that we are also angry with God. And people, when we go through this, it is very, very important to be absolutely transparent. God knows what is inside of your heart. God knows what is your feeling. If you're angry, verbalize it and talk to God in this situation. So after that, the frustration and the fact that we cannot deal with it, we cannot go back to the old life, that we are facing a new reality that we are uncomfortable with, it's an unknown future we do not know how to get into and what will happen at the end of it. We cannot see the end of the horizon. We fall into depression. And in the depression side, it is very important for us to see that you can move one way or the other way. You can try to go back to the old life that used to be, that can never be before. But you act, you try to think, and you try to speak like you were before the incident happened. The amazing part is that the people around you realize that you've changed. It is only you that don't realize that you're speaking differently already, that your actions are different already, and that your mindset has changed. And then when you realize that, you go into the other side of the depression, that you go on to medication, prescription medication. And I don't say it is wrong to be on prescription medication, but it must have a time and a place. Once you become dependent on that, once it becomes a crux in your life, it becomes a new lifestyle, and then it becomes a culture. And to break a culture, to break into a lifestyle, it's very difficult to get out of that. Some people go into pornography, other people go into drugs, other people go into alcohol. This phase is the most dangerous phase to be in. In this phase, it is absolutely important to go back to the book of John, the first book of John, the first chapter 6, 7, and 8, where God says, when we live in the light, like He is in the light, and we confess and we become transparent, then God is able to forgive and to cleanse us, to clean us from what has happened in that phase. In this period of our life, we need a place and a space to say who we really are. And we need to get a people, a person or persons that we can start to confess our life, to be transparent, to say, I am on drugs, I am doing this is what happened, this is my side of the story, my guilt side, and this is what other people has brought onto me. To be clinically true with yourself in front of God. In the next session, I will talk about that, because when we meet one another, what we call church, we need three things. We need to meet God, but we also need to meet one another. The aspect that we really need to happen now in our lives is this, that we meet one another in the face of God. And when we meet one another in the presence of God, there's no room for darkness. There's no room to hide something. It must be absolutely a transparent period to go through. And when we are willing to do that, when we team up with a person or persons to guide us, not to tell us what to do, but to help us to understand where we are and where we need to go to. What are your talents? What are your giftings? Well, that you think that were destroyed or discredited. It is not true. To bring you out of the lie into the truth, so that you can start to repackage your life, reconstruct your life, consolidate your life, and start to make small, incremental, purposeful aims that you are going to work through. What is the purpose of your life? Write it down and make one or two small incremental stages that you will go through to be successful. In the process, you and the other person or persons will see what is going to work for you and what is not going to work for you. If it's not going to work for you, we put it to the side. And then we start with you, and you reconstruct your life into the future. And that will bring you to the last phase of the 7 phases, that you will move into a totally new life. Let's go back to Joseph for a moment. The dream that Joseph had, the reality thereof, was totally different from the end of the phases of his new life. Suddenly, Joseph sat, and he was in charge of a world much greater than his family. His dream eventually, or originally, said to him that his brothers will bow down to him. And the new reality that God has given him, and given him grace to go through, and the willingness that he said, I will go through this with my God, I will jump over this wall. God gave him a total new life, much bigger, 100 times, 1,000 times bigger than he ever perceived in his own dream. The new reality, when we embrace a reality and do not fight that, get people involved with our lives so that together with God we walk into the future, it's going to be a brilliant future. I would like to end this session and just go back to a story. I taught at a seminary a couple of years ago. And what I do is a 3-year course on missiology. I say to the students, I would like to know you, not only your name, when you were born, etc., married, but I want you to write a 1 to 5 pager for me. Tell me where you come from. Tell me where you are today, and tell me what you want to be 5 and 10 years from now. And one evening I picked up one of the papers of one of the students, and he came from a very disadvantaged informal settlement. And in the paper he wrote that when he was 14 years old, he joined a gang to get some identity, because he was without identity. And the people that he got involved in gave him identity. And in the process, they started to steal and stuff, and all, you know what's going on, drugs and sex and alcohol. And eventually one night they had a big party, and at the end of the party, the gang leader said to him, I want to speak to you, and he took him to one side. And then the gang leader raped him. And for 2 years after that, he was just strolling around. His own world of reality was shattered. The trigger that caused that, the rape, just shattered his whole life. His belief and his confidence in the gang that should have protected him has been destroyed. And then 2 years later, he joined a church, and he got involved in the youth, 16 years old, and he worked with the youth leader. And one evening he said to the youth leader, I need to confess a few things. And the youth leader said, come with me. And the youth leader took him to a pub, made him drunk, and at the end of the evening, the youth leader also raped him. And for the second time in his life reality was shattered. There was no ignoring this. The frustration, the depression that followed took him 2 years eventually to join the Bible school. And when I sat with him, I said to him, why are you here? And he said to me, interesting, he said, number one, I need a place and a space where I can tell who I really am. I would like to get in front of my students, your students in my class, and tell them exactly what has happened. Not to receive sympathy, not to latch onto them like a parasite and drain them from the energy for the next 3 years. I just need a place to confess what happened, how I feel, get my inner feelings out, the hatred, the anger that I have, the depression, the fear that I had. As the book of John says, first book of John, first chapter, 6, 7, and 8, if we come together and we live in the light, like God is in the light, then He is able to cleanse us from all the things that has happened before. He said, then I need friends. I need to partner with people that can walk with me, and I want to walk with them into the future. He says, and I need in these 3 years to come a biblical foundation to build my new life on, so that when I need to take decisions into the future, it will be based on biblical principles. And I said to them, after the 3 years, what do you want to do? He said, then I want to go back to the informal settlement where I came from, because I know the fears of those people. I know their empty worldview. I know the fake pleasure that they have. I know how they think. And I'm the person that can bring Jesus Christ to them, to heal them, to give them a new life, to give them new identity, and to be available for them when they want to start to walk into a new future with Jesus Christ.